Hello there! I hope you're going to enjoy the atmosphere because it's raining outside, so the droplets of rain are bumping on my roof, so it's quite cozy in here right now, to be honest. Anyway, as I wait as layers of paint and putty are going to dry out on that wall, because I'm still renovating my workshop, I thought it's going to be a good idea to talk about 34-tooth chainring oval from China, which I started talking about a few weeks ago. So what's my opinion? Well, I like it. Almost makes me hate the one by drivetrains a little less. Almost. Anyhow, I've been riding it for about 8 weeks, mostly pulling my progeny, sometimes with, sometimes without luggage. Albeit I also been commuting on it, and I did some cross-country riding. Well, let's call it cross-country. Anyway, total kilometrage is about 500. So, approximately 8 weeks ago I mounted this to the SLX crankset, like this one, no, precisely this one, and I started riding it. Well, at the first moment what strikes you when you push a few pedal strokes is that there's this weird jerky feeling at the end of each cycle, somewhere out here at the dead spot. It bothered me for a few minutes, but then it was pretty much gone, the feeling, I mean. Then you simply stop noticing it. Another thing that struck me after a while is that in spite of being 34 tooth, which is pretty big for this for a mountain bike, it seems smaller. I consistently ran smaller cassette cock than I normally would. This effect is not major, but it's noticeable. In the same way, riding off saddle when climbing, for example, seems more fluid or more consistent. I can't really find a proper word for it, but point being is that it feels like the resistance to pedaling is much more constant throughout the entire crank rotation. Incidentally, it obviously is because there is larger variation in the chain tension throughout the entire cycle, and I have to say that I have to write it off as simply our senses working like this. And by the way, this consistency feels splendid when doing out-of-saddle effort like pushing uphill. There's less of that going upstairs kind of feeling when you're pushing yourself. Anyhow, this perception of consistency is consistent with some of the claims of oval chainring makers. And come to think of it though, it makes sense since humans produce power in strokes, but the dead spot appears to us as a brief rise in the perceived gear ratio of the bike. If we lower the gear ratio just there at the dead spot, then the dead spot, intermission. I don't like that term, and I will call it an idle phase. From now on, that's an idle phase. Continuing. Going through the idle phase of the crank rotation will require less effort if we lower the gear ratio at the idle phase of the rotation, obviously. Moreover, when doing technical riding, especially when it requires low cadence, it is more likely to get stuck or stalled at the end of the idle phase, which makes sense because all the inertia you built up during that part, that crank rotation is now gone, and you still haven't started to produce power with the other leg. Since oval reduced the ratio at the idle phase, it is less likely to get stuck or stalled. Now the last thing I noted is that because of the floating front ratio, because of the ovalization, switching rear gears, interestingly, even over some quite large cock size differences, is much less pronounced or feels much less pronounced. This is especially apparent when you're doing the switch on the 11 to 13 cancerous jump at the end of the cassette, or 10 to 12 if you have an XD driver or microspline, whatever. On a round chainring, such jump feels massive and is very jarring. On this oval, it was just noticeable. There wasn't much of a problem. In all honesty, that alone, for me at least, because I like tight jumps on the cassettes, would be a reason to get an oval. So, you might want to ask, did it make me faster? I can't really tell. I don't have a power meter, and in retrospect, the ring I've got is simply too small to really exert myself. But I've done some research. There are 4 major makers of ovals. This is Absolute Black, Doval, Rotor and Asymmetric. 2 of the 4 provided some info, Rotor and Absolute Black. Asymmetric also possibly provided some information, but it was in French, and as you can imagine, I don't speak French. Anyhow, Rotor's website is horrid with a light grey on white text, which I could not read because I'm half blind. So, absolute black it is. According to them, the main benefit of non-round rings is not increased power, which is something asymmetric claims, possibly in French, but, returning to the absolute black, reduced fatigue and increased efficiency, whatever that means to them. However, absolute black cites a study which claims that while using an oval you get a smidgen lower oxygen consumption, heart rate and a higher force efficiency, which is fine. I mean, makes sense. But will it make me faster? From what they claim, and by they I mean absolute black, no, you're not going to be faster. And it makes sense because making it easier to go through the idle phase, where you're not producing power, well, doesn't make your legs suddenly be able to push harder. But since you'll use less effort to go through the idle phase, you should be less tired over a long period of time. That alone would explain lower oxygen uptake, slower lactate buildup and all that good things. I'm not really a specialist when it comes to training, so I'm maybe simplifying something to a level that isn't really acceptable. Anyway, there is also one other piece of evidence which makes the claim, the fact that you're not going to be faster, quite evident. Well, people who get paid to win Tour de France's and Vuelta a Españas still ride round chainrings and still win against people who ride ovals, which means that you're not getting any free power out of this equation, because if there was any advantage to get from ovals, like 3% extra power or something like that, everyone in the professional peloton would ride ovals. Let's get even more extreme outside. Anyway, the fact that you're not going to be faster kind of sucks, because it makes harder to sell oval chainrings, because the advantages they provide aren't really apparent from the get-go. By the way, if you haven't noticed yet, I'm starting to like ovals. I actually already do. So much that I ordered another ring from China. This one is going to be 38. It's going to go to my winter commuter, which I'm currently building. There are other things somewhat annoying when it comes to ovals, which are minor, but I'm going to talk about them anyway. First of all, there is no sensible nomenclature for them. All we get is the tooth count and the information that is a non-round chainring. Sometimes, in case of some ovals, I think Rotor does it, we get something like 20% ovalization, whatever that means. What I think would be useful if we got to know the size of the top and bottom cog of the oval, of the virtual top and bottom cog. For example, this is a 34, but I suspect that the size of the ring that would be equivalent to the largest diameter of this one would be 36, and that would be the major size, and the minor size would be the 32 across the smallest diameter. Now that is important because when choosing an oval ring, when going from a round one especially, you can either choose the same tooth count size, 34, equivalent for this. You can choose the same minor size, 32 in this particular case, or you can choose the major size, 36. Kind of complicated, I know, but each of these approaches has some sort of philosophical underpinning, because you see, if you choose the same tooth count, you get to preserve the gear ratio of your bicycle, and I assume you're comfortable with it. If you choose the same minor size, which means that you get here, you get to push a bigger gear more comfortably. And if you choose the same major size as the one you're comfortable with, the idle phase becomes easier, so you should be even more comfortable on your bicycle. For now, taking into account that I think that this ring seems smaller than 34, I think that the best option would be to choose the same minor size. But that is one of those, what are those names? Opinions, right? That's one of those. Anyhow, the same complaint is for the orientation of the power idle parts of the ring. You know, where the ring has the largest diameter is the major power. Absolute black, for example, says that we did the math, we know we have the optimal position. If you're choosing a rotor, you have even like 1.7 billion holes that you can orientate your ring the whatever way you think it's going to be most comfortable to you. And asymmetric is like something. Anyway, Chinese manufacturers that do whatever. Anyway, it would be nice to know what this ring is, because 34 oval, so is it a 34 with plus 2 on the major, plus 2 on the minor, and 0% eccentricity or major axis angle? I don't know. I'd like to know that. Well, next thing. There is a little bit of confusion about actual gear ratio of an oval ring. So the answer is simple. On an average, a ring of 34 has the same gear ratio as the round 34 on average through entire power stroke. If you're going to do one crank rotation, you're pulling 34 tooth of chain, so the average gear ratio is the same. It's just the momentary gear ratio of the ring is changing, which is a bit confusing, I guess. Speaking of confusing things, chains should be sized for an oval ring using the same good old trusty method of big plus 2, link in the low bar for a detailed explanation. Well, the same trusty method of big plus 2 at fully compressed suspension. Because while there is a little touch of shimmy induced at the cage of the rear derailleur, this effect is really subtle and can be safely ignored. Actually, in most cases, you can even use an oval chainring on an otherwise single-speed drivetrain without using chain tensioners. It's simply that subtle. Another issue I found being asked here and there is, do the variable size of an oval chainring interfere with the kinematics of the rear suspension? And the answer to that question is yes, they do. But this effect is also very subtle and usually not noticeable. But you know, as suspensions are designed around certain golden size of a ring, usually 32 or 36, changing the size changes the kinematics of the suspension. But usually the competently designed suspension will not react negatively to something that is a touch bigger, a touch smaller than that golden size. So you wouldn't really notice this unless you are, well, a special snowflake. So unless you're running a 22 tooth chainring on a bicycle that was designed around 32 or 36, you should be safe. Because in short, size variations of an oval chainring are simply too small to cause any noticeable effect in the kinematics. They are there, they are just insignificant. Now I already said this, I'm going to repeat myself. I like ovals. Even after the brief test I've done, I am very positive about them. But I need to make it clear that until I get to play with an actual power meter, which means I need to buy one, the answer to the question, does it make me faster, is inconclusive. I need to either get a power meter or read some actual studies, not just the results provided by Absolute Black, because obviously they are not an impartial party in this particular case. However, the ring I've got certainly, in my opinion, made the bike feel nicer when you are riding it, and it seems to be corroborated by others on the internet, because I obviously made my research. Now, it is also quite important to say that the improvement isn't just like some day and night difference and you should drop everything and buy an oval chainring. No, it's just nicer. If you are on the market for a new ring, I'd say you should probably consider one, especially if you're riding a one-by drivetrain. However, if you have a perfectly working bicycle, stay with what you have, because it's better. It's just not incredibly night and day difference, drop everything and get one. It's just nicer. Anyway, with that in mind, thank you for your undivided attention. Well, obviously you need to bell this channel, the channel, like this video, share with everyone you know, and I hope to see you in the next video when I'm going to, I think, unveil my great